200 years ago, this was a fishing village on a mudflat. Today, it moves more cargo than any port on Earth, houses more skyscrapers than New York and Chicago combined, and runs a metro system so long it would stretch from London to Berlin. That is not growth. That is something else entirely, and almost none of it had to happen. Not the towers, not the financial district, barely even the ground. Most of what you're looking at sits on silted river mud that was, within living memory, open water or farmland. Shanghai didn't slowly accumulate greatness. It erupted, repeatedly, violently, improbably, from almost nothing. So how does a mudflat on the Yangtze Delta become this? We're going to find out. We're feeding Qing-era woodblock maps, Victorian photographs, missionary sketches, and colonial insurance surveys into AI, and using it to reconstruct what Shanghai actually looked like in each of its transformations, street by street, era by era. These are informed visualizations, not certainties. Where we're filling in details, we'll say so, because this story deserves to be seen, not just read. A city that nearly collapsed 3 times, 90 years of rival empires carving out sovereign zones inside the same city limits. One neighborhood that became the only refuge on Earth for 20,000 stateless people. A reinvention so fast that grandparents couldn't recognize their own street. The Huangpu River runs through all of it. Keep an eye on the river. It will tell you everything. Start around the 7th to 10th century. Stand on the edge of what will eventually become one of the world's great cities, and you'd be standing in water, or mud, or both, depending on the season. The Yangtze River and its tributary systems have been depositing sediment into the East China Sea for millions of years, slowly building the flat, silted plain of the Yangtze Delta. But the process is not complete. The land is still forming. Parts of what is now eastern Shanghai, the entire district of Pudong, would have been tidal flat or open coastal water. The earth here is young, soft, and saturated. In the grey delta light, the dominant sounds are birds and wind, and the creak of a flat-bottomed fishing boat. The smell is brackish, salt water mixing with river silt, rotting reed, the particular low-tide odor of the Chinese coast. There are no streets. There are paths worn between fishing settlements, a few administrative posts set up by Tang Dynasty officials who recognized the area's value for salt production and coastal trade. Not a city, not even close to a city. A scattering of people working a landscape that the landscape had barely agreed to become. The Tang government notes the fisheries, taxes the salt, and moves on. But the land keeps building. Tide after tide, season after season. Silt piles on silt. The coastline creeps eastward. Here is the thing that should stop you cold. The ground that Shanghai stands on is not geological bedrock. It is, in the most literal sense, river deposit, compressed, layered, slowly drying mud. The city that will eventually be built here with its towers and its subways and its port cranes will be built on material so soft that it will, centuries later, begin to sink under its own weight. But that comes much later. For now, as the land firms up and the fishing communities grow, someone notices that the river running through all of this, the Huangpu, connects to larger waterways which connect to larger still. And wherever rivers connect, trade follows. By the time of the Song dynasty, roughly the 10th through 13th centuries, something recognizable as a settlement has taken shape along the Huangpu. The ancient name for the area, Hu, is tied in historical records to a type of bamboo fish trap used in the local waterways. The name tells you everything about what this place was: a fishing community, organized around the river, defined by what the river gave. Picture it during a busy morning: wooden piers extending into the brown water, flat-bottomed trading boats arriving from up and down the coast, loaded with bolts of silk, sacks of grain, bales of raw cotton. Open front market stalls lining the lanes behind the waterfront, vendors calling in the Shanghainese dialect that is already distinguishable from standard Mandarin. The smell of fish sauce drying in the morning heat, rain-wet timber, ink from a merchant's account book, dark-dyed cotton clothing on virtually everyone. A county seat is formally established. This is the administrative birth of Shanghai as a named place, a settlement recognized by the state as having enough economic activity to warrant governance. It is not glamorous. It is not powerful. It is a regional market town doing what regional market towns do, connecting producers and buyers along a river. And then the Mongol armies come. The conquest of the Song dynasty by the Mongol Yuan dynasty is one of the great ruptures of Chinese history, catastrophic for North China, devastating for the old political and cultural centers. But here is the paradox. For Shanghai, the disruption is almost good. As northern trade routes collapse and northern merchants flee south, the Yangtze Delta becomes more economically important, not less. Commerce reroutes through the coastal ports. The Huangpu sees more traffic, not less. The settlement that would become Shanghai grows precisely because everything above it is in crisis. This is the first time Shanghai does this. It will not be the last. Again and again, this city will find a way to rise from someone else's catastrophe. Crisis for Shanghai is a growth engine. For now, the river is sustenance, grain, cotton, fish, the slow accumulation of regional wealth. It is not yet a global artery, but the Yangtze Delta is growing rich, and eventually the Ming dynasty would decide it needed to be defended. Sometime in the middle of the 16th century in the Ming dynasty, Shanghai gets its first city wall. And it is strange. Most Chinese cities of the period are walled in a grid, rectangular, ordered, reflecting Confucian ideals of cosmic alignment and administrative clarity. Shanghai's wall is circular, nearly 4.5 kilometers in circumference, built of rammed earth, enclosing the old market town in a shape unlike almost anything else in the region. The reason is practical, not philosophical. The wall went up fast, following the existing contours of the settlement, in direct response to raids from coastal pirates that were devastating the Yangtze Delta at the time. There was no time for geometry. There was only time for defense. Inside the wall, dense, narrow lanes, the smell of incense from the city god temple, merchants conducting business by day, the sound of a gong marking the closing of the gates at dusk. Outside, farmers, fishermen, the unprotected majority going about lives that the wall was not built for them. The raids continued for years after the wall was built. The defense worked only partially. But the shape of that wall, that unusual non-standard circle, locked in the footprint of old Shanghai so completely that it is still visible in maps today. The streets inside the former wall still curve differently from the grid streets outside it. You can trace the ghost of the 16th century defensive circle just by looking at a modern satellite image. A wall built to stop pirates ended up defining the geometry of a global city for the next 400 years. Inside those walls, through the later Ming and early Qing dynasties, the city kept growing. Commerce, temples, a culture distinctly Shanghainese. The merchants inside the circle were getting comfortable. They had no idea what was sailing toward them. The year 1842, the Huangpu River. British warships sit at anchor midstream, their gun ports facing the city. Qing officials meet with British representatives under conditions that are, to put it plainly, not negotiated between equals. The First Opium War has ended in British military victory, and the Treaty of Nanjing is about to rewrite the rules for 5 Chinese port cities. Shanghai is one of them. The waterfront is in chaos. Civilian boats have been pulled aside. Crowds on the bank watch in silence or retreat into the lanes. The smell in the air is tidal water and something metallic. Not quite fear, but the chemical quality of a moment that cannot be undone. The Qing government did not lose Shanghai in battle. They signed it away on paper. The treaty forced China to open the city as a treaty port, which meant foreign nationals had the right to reside, trade, and be subject to their own laws, not Chinese law, in designated settlement zones. A British settlement is established north of the old walled city along the river. French and American zones follow within a decade. This is the thing to understand. Those settlements were legally and practically outside Qing jurisdiction. They built their own roads, their own gas lighting, their own police forces and courts and jails, different flags, different laws, different currency, all inside the borders of a city that China theoretically still owned. The river is no longer just a trade route. Warships from multiple empires ride the Huangpu. Flags of nations, Shanghai has never traded with fly from the western bank. The first foreign buildings go up along the waterfront, and the most consequential urban zone in modern Chinese history begins to take shape. Walk the western bank of the Huangpu through the second half of the 19th century, and you are watching a city being invented in real time. Neoclassical stone facades rising along what will become known as the Bund, the embankment road running north from the old circular city. British trading houses, American banking firms, French consulates, the Custom House with its neo-Baroque clock tower visible for miles up and down the river. The smell is river mud and horse sweat and coal smoke and money. A very particular blend that early photographs capture in the faces of the men doing the hauling. Chinese laborers carry the stone and timber that builds a city in which they will have almost no legal standing. Sedan chairs give way to rickshaws. Rickshaws eventually share the waterfront promenade with the first motor cars. Each decade adds another layer of infrastructure that the layer beneath it had not anticipated. Then, in the 1850s, the Taiping Rebellion explodes across southern China. This is one of the deadliest civil conflicts in human history, killing tens of millions of people across the Chinese countryside. And it sends a human wave toward Shanghai. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese refugees, merchants, artisans, farmers, entire displaced communities pour into the foreign settlements. This breaks the arrangement entirely. The settlements had been designed as enclaves for foreign nationals. The Taiping crisis made that fiction impossible to maintain. Chinese families moved in, filled the lanes, opened shops, paid rent, built lives. The international settlement transforms almost overnight, from an expatriate enclave into a genuinely mixed city. Chinese and foreign capital, Chinese and foreign culture, operating in uneasy proximity under a framework that satisfied almost no one. That mixing, chaotic and unequal as it was, is the spark that makes Shanghai what it becomes. A new culture starts forming, part Qing, part Victorian, part something that has no name yet. The decades between roughly 1900 and the mid-1930s are Shanghai's most mythologized era, and the myths are not entirely wrong. Art Deco towers rising next to Qing-era lane houses, department stores with electric signs visible from the river, jazz clubs and opium dens on the same block, not metaphorically, literally on the same block. Rickshaw pullers and silk-clad socialites and factory workers coughing through a dawn shift, all sharing the same morning streets. The smell changes by neighborhood. Sweet rice wine in the lanes, Chanel and motor oil on Nanjing Road, industrial coal smoke drifting from the textile districts in the north. The Shikumen, stone gate lane houses, a hybrid form that exists nowhere else on Earth, combining the courtyard logic of Chinese residential architecture with the terrace row density of British urbanism, spread across the residential city. Chinese-owned newspapers, Chinese film studios producing films that competed with Hollywood imports, Chinese department stores, Chinese banks, Chinese political organizations of every ideological flavor. The Chinese Communist Party holds its first congress in Shanghai in 1921. The city's labor movement is one of the most militant in Asia. Nationalist crackdowns in the late 1920s are brutal. Political assassinations happen in broad daylight on well-known streets. The Green Gang, a criminal organization with deep ties to both the financial establishment and the nationalist government, controls significant parts of the city's economy. This is what the Paris of the East actually looked like up close, not just the chandeliers and the jazz, also the factory dormitories where 12-year-olds worked 14-hour shifts, also the slums just outside the bright zones. Shanghai in the 1930s had a more cosmopolitan press and film culture than most European cities, and some of the worst urban poverty and organized crime on the continent. Glamour and desperation shared the same alley. Meanwhile, on the Huangpu, the cargo tonnage is staggering. The river never stops. Junks and steamships and naval vessels moving simultaneously, the docks running through the night, the water the color of churned silt and diesel. Then the bombs started falling. There had been a warning in 1932, Japanese military forces attacking the Jabei district north of the international settlement, a preview of what was coming. The international community condemned it. The fighting stopped. Everyone went back to pretending the situation was stable. It was not stable. In the summer of 1937, the full invasion comes. The Battle of Shanghai is one of the largest and most brutal engagements of the Second Sino-Japanese War. Chinese nationalist forces fight with extraordinary courage against a materially superior enemy, but the result is devastating. Jabei, a dense residential and industrial district, is reduced to rubble. The smoke visible from the Bund, refugees streaming by the tens of thousands across the invisible borders of the international settlement, which remains grotesquely an island of nominal neutrality while the city around it burns. The smell of those months is ash and fear. Church bells replaced by air raid sirens. Streets that had hosted jazz musicians the previous weekend now choked with people carrying everything they owned. Japanese forces occupied Chinese-administered Shanghai, while the international settlement and French concession sit in this surreal, suspended state, still technically sovereign, still flying their flags, still running their trams, while just outside their borders, the war rages. It lasts until December 1941. Pearl Harbor ends the pretense. Japan occupies the entire city. Internment camps open for Allied nationals. The cosmopolitan experiment, the mixed city that took a century to build, effectively ends. But here is the detail that changes the moral weight of the whole story. Between 1938 and 1941, during that strange neutral island period, Shanghai became the only place on Earth that would accept Jewish refugees from Europe without requiring a visa. Over 20,000 stateless people, Jews fleeing Nazi Germany and occupied Europe, arrived in Shanghai and built a functioning community in the Huangpu district. Synagogues, schools, newspapers in German and Yiddish. A refugee world within a refugee city. Most of them survived the war. Many eventually emigrated to Israel or the United States. Some stayed in Shanghai for decades. The community they built in Huangpu is one of the stranger, more poignant chapters in the city's history, and it is almost unknown outside of specialist circles. Occupation continued until 1945. Life inside the occupied city was reduced and constrained, but it continued. The city survived, the way it always survives, by adapting to whoever is currently in control. August 1945. Nationalist Chinese flags replacing Japanese ones. Crowds in the street, a city exhaling. But the exhale doesn't last long. The nationalist government, the Kuomintang, which had spent the war years in exile in Chongqing, returns to Shanghai and discovers it has inherited a broken economy. Hyperinflation hits with a violence that is almost impossible to convey. By the late 1940s, prices in Shanghai were doubling within days, sometimes within hours. Black market currency exchanges operate openly on street corners. American GIS move through the bars and jazz clubs that have reopened, strange spectators to a city eating itself economically. Communist pamphlets appear on walls overnight, offering an explanation for the chaos and a promise that it can end. The business class, the compradors and bankers and factory owners who had built Shanghai's commercial culture over the previous century, watches the nationalist government's inability to stabilize anything with growing horror. Some begin moving capital to Hong Kong, to Taiwan, anywhere outside the mainland. The signs are visible to anyone looking. The People's Liberation Army enters Shanghai in May 1949. There is almost no fighting in the city itself. The decisive battles have already happened elsewhere. Shanghai is simply occupied, quietly, efficiently, by soldiers under orders not to loot, not to commandeer civilian property, not to billet in private homes. The PLA troops sleep in the street rather than enter buildings uninvited. That discipline is itself a message, directed specifically at the business class. We are not the chaos you were afraid of. Whether the business class believed it, they had very little choice about what came next. The Huangpu goes quiet. Foreign ships weigh anchor and leave. The flags of western banks come down from the Bund. The waterway that had connected Shanghai to the world for a century is suddenly, almost silently, sealed. The 1950s. The streets look different in almost every way. Factory sirens where jazz used to be. Soviet-style propaganda banners mounted on Art Deco facades. A visual collision that speaks to how completely the political order has inverted. The old lane houses, the shikumen, have been converted into communal dwellings. Multiple families sharing spaces designed for one. Courtyard meetings replace courtyard privacy. The city that ran on capital now runs on quotas. Private businesses are nationalized. Foreign residents, the last of the treaty port foreigners, the stateless Europeans, the traders who had stayed through the war, leave in large numbers through the early 1950s. Shanghai's cotton mills and light manufacturing industries are repurposed for national industrial goals set in Beijing. The Bun's Grand Banks, which once housed British and American financial power, become offices for Chinese government agencies. The neon goes dark, the fashion grays, the sound of the city changes, louder in some ways, with factory and political rally noise, quieter in the human texture of its streets. And then the Cultural Revolution comes in 1966, and the attack on everything coded as old, bourgeois, foreign, or counter-revolutionary intensifies past what anyone had anticipated. Shanghai, as one of China's most visibly cosmopolitan cities, is an ideological target. Temples are attacked, traditional storefronts destroyed. Intellectuals are sent to the countryside for re-education. The urban fabric of the city changes through destruction, not construction. Here is the thing that saves Shanghai from complete collapse. The state needs it too much. Through all the revolutionary tumult, Shanghai's factories continue producing a disproportionate share of China's industrial output. The city is politically suspect, too capitalist in its bones, too foreign in its habits, and economically indispensable. The revolution attacks its culture while depending on its productivity. Shanghai survives the contradiction by being too valuable to fully destroy. The revolution burned out eventually. The leaders who had launched it aged, lost power, died. And a new leadership began asking a question that had no simple ideological answer. What was Shanghai now allowed to become? Late 1970s. Stand on the Bund and look around. The stone buildings are still there, essentially unchanged since the 1930s, because there has been no money and no political permission to change them. They are peeling, their facades patched in places, their grandeur faded to something melancholy. The street in front of them is full of bicycles, very few cars. The river behind you carries a fraction of the traffic it once did. People are cautiously opening small restaurants and repair shops. A few joint venture signs appear in shop windows, Chinese text alongside English in combinations that suggest the two languages have not yet figured out how to share a sentence. The city is waking up slowly, unsure how far it is allowed to go. Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms, launched after 1978, opened the door to market activity, but not equally everywhere. The first wave of special economic zones is established in Guangdong province, near Hong Kong. Shanghai, despite being China's largest industrial city, its historic commercial capital, is deliberately left out. The reasons are partly political, partly strategic. Shanghai is too important to experiment with recklessly, or perhaps, in some readings, too important to allow too quickly to the reformers. Shanghai's local officials lobby aggressively. They argue their case. They lose, then argue again. By the late 1980s, the approvals begin arriving. Development zones are authorized. Something is being planned across the river, on the eastern bank, the Pudong side, where there is currently almost nothing. The Huangpu stirs. Small cargo ships reappear on the water. Modern cranes rise on the Pudong bank for the first time in decades. You can stand on the Bund and see, across the river, the first signs of something being built on land that is, at that moment, still largely farmland and low-rise villages. Shanghai's long wait may have made it hungrier. Being left behind may have made the leap larger. 1990, the Pudong New Area is officially designated. A financial district, the Lujiazui district, is planned on the eastern bank of the Huangpu. The land it will occupy was, within the living memory of people still alive in 1990, vegetable fields and small villages. Older Shanghainese would, in the years ahead, describe taking ferry boats across the river to buy produce on land where skyscrapers would eventually rise. The transformation happens so fast that the memory of the farmland overlaps with the reality of the towers in the same human lifetime. What follows is one of the most concentrated episodes of urban construction in history. Hundreds of cranes working simultaneously. The Oriental Pearl Tower rising, its distinctive spheres visible for kilometers across the flat delta. Then the Jinmao Tower, sleek and tapering. Then more and more and more. The construction dust is visible from the Bund. The noise is constant, day and night, for years. The Yangpu and Nanpu bridges appear, stitching the east and west banks together with suspension spans that dwarf anything previously in the city. Tunnels follow beneath the river. The ferry boats that had connected Puxi and Pudong for generations abruptly become unnecessary, then quaint, then tourist attractions. The speed outpaces everything. Infrastructure goes up before population arrives. Glass-clad towers stand finished and gleaming in what is still, around them, an active construction site. Banks and financial firms are recruited from New York and London and Tokyo to take space in buildings that are not yet complete. The city is being assembled in real time, on a schedule that logic would call impossible. The entire Pudong skyline, one of the most recognizable urban silhouettes on Earth, emerges in roughly a decade, 10 to 15 years from farmland to global financial district. No other city in modern history has done this at this scale, at this speed. But a skyline is not a city. Cities need people. And the people were coming. Through the 1990s and 2000s and into the 2010s, Shanghai grows in a way that has no real precedent. The population swells from roughly 13 million in 1990 to more than 24 million within 2 decades. This is not natural population growth. This is migration, one of the largest internal migrations in modern history, as workers from Anhui and Sichuan and Henan and dozens of other provinces arrive to build and staff and serve the new city. Construction workers crowd dormitory blocks on the city's expanding periphery. New subway lines push outward in every direction, making land that was farmland 5 years ago accessible to the center in 30 minutes. Luxury malls rise next to wet markets that refuse to leave. The old Shikuman Lane houses, the hybrid architecture that is uniquely Shanghai, get demolished at terrifying speed, preserved in certain neighborhoods as heritage sites, or converted into boutique commercial districts like Xintiandi, where the stone gate lanes now house restaurants and wine bars for the affluent new middle class. The tension is public and unresolved. Government agencies fight each other over the same blocks, one pushing demolition, another pushing preservation. Shanghai demolishes more historical urban fabric in 20 years than most cities lose in a century, and then turns around and wins international awards for heritage conservation. The contradiction is not hypocrisy. It is a city genuinely torn between two things it needs, and unable to slow down long enough to choose. The Hukou household registration system means that millions of the migrants who built the new Shanghai have no legal claim to its services, no access to local schools, no right to locally subsidized housing, no path to permanent status. They build the city and exist in it at partial legal standing. The inequality is structural and largely invisible to the tourists photographing the skyline. The 2010 World Expo arrives, Shanghai's coming out party to the world, held on land that required the forced relocation of entire neighborhoods. Over 70 million visitors in 6 months. The city performing, at enormous human cost, the version of itself it wants the world to see. Stand on the restored Bund Promenade and look east. Pudong's towers reflect in the Huangpu at night, the old western bank and the new eastern bank facing each other across the water as if posing for their own contrast. The river as mirror. The whole city's story in one glance. Today's Shanghai runs on contradictions. The metro, one of the longest in the world, moves millions of people daily beneath a skyline of more than 700 skyscrapers. Lane-house coffee shops operate in spaces that were communal residences 2 decades ago. Elderly residents do Tai Chi in riverside parks directly beneath the maglev line. The fastest commercial train on Earth, running overhead with a sound like wind. Electric vehicles on the streets where rickshaws ran. Drone light shows over the Huangpu, where gunboats once anchored. The port at Yangshan is the busiest container port on Earth by volume. The city that was a mudflat fishing settlement is now a financial center, luxury retail hub, AI research corridor, and manufacturing base, all simultaneously. And yet, Shanghai sinks, literally. Ground subsidence from decades of construction has caused measurable downward movement across multiple districts. The city built on soft silt is slowly, imperceptibly, returning toward the water it came from. The geology asserts itself on timescales no policy can control. The Huangpu keeps moving, from fishing village to colonial artery to revolutionary border to mirror of reinvention. The river carries the whole story if you know how to read it. One mudflat, one waterway, 200 turbulent years, and 24 million people building the next chapter right now, on ground that is still, quietly, settling. What city should we time travel to next? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one.